Most CEOs I interviewed instinctively think that keeping promises is 80% of the answer for trust.
Welcome to the Vistage podcast series. I'm Dave Nelson, a Vistage member since 2003, part of CEO Group 676 in Pittsburgh, and your podcast host. Every episode, we connect with an extraordinary business leader to get valuable ideas to apply in our own organizations. Today, I'm joined by John Blakey, and we're talking about the importance of trust in business, both internally and externally. John works with business leaders and elite sports coaches to transform the triple bottom line, as he calls it: outstanding results, inspiring relationships, and a positive reputation in society as a whole. Hey, John, welcome to the Vistage podcast.
Yeah, good afternoon, Dave. Glad to be here and looking forward to talking about this important topic of trust in leadership.
A very important topic, as many people have illustrated through their counterexamples. So let me give a quick setup. So John, for the past 12 years, has helped more than 100 CEOs and MDs, managing directors, from 22 different countries to achieve their goals. He's worked with Team GB/England, sports coaches in rowing, cricket, diving, and target shooting. We don't see much cricket here in the United States, but I know it's popular around the world.
Yeah, a little bit like baseball, but not quite.
Not quite, exactly. In fact, I have seen a little bit of it. I have no idea what's going on. In 2012, John co-authored with Ian Daly the critically acclaimed book Challenging Coaching. And then this year in 2016, he followed up with The Trusted Executive, to our point today. This is a book that was inspired by his prize-winning doctoral research at Aston Business School. This same year, 2016, John was named as one of the top thought leaders in trust by Trust Across America. By the way, John is also an in-demand Vistage speaker. So always like to start out with what got you going on this. What was the spark that ignited your passion on this topic of trust in business?
Well, Dave, it goes back 13 years now to my last corporate role. In my last corporate role, I was international managing director in a company called Logica, a 40,000 person global software company. And I'd been in that role for 2 weeks. I was 38 years old, and I was walking down the corridor of the headquarters of Logica in London, and walking towards me was the chief executive of Logica of that time, Dr. Martin Reed. And as Martin came towards me, he said, "How's it going, Blakey?" And I said, "Yeah, Martin, it's going great. Yesterday we closed the biggest deal in our sector that we've ever done, a $50 million outsourcing deal with Lotus Cars." And Martin came back quick as a flash and said, "You think that's good, do you?" And I thought, yeah, here we go. I'm either going to stand my ground or I'm going to back down. But I don't know whether it was naivety or bravery, but I decided to stand my ground. And I said, "Yeah, Martin, I think it's great." And at that point, a forefinger came jabbing into my face. And I heard the words, "You know what your problem is, Blakey?" And I thought, no, but I'm clearly about to find out. He said, "You're too nice." And with that, he just walked away and left me stunned and bemused. And I thought to myself, too nice. Too nice for what? Too nice to get to the top without cooking the books. Too nice to lead a team without stealing their energy. Too nice to, get along and deliver results without trampling along others along the way. And really that lit the fire. The fire in me was to prove that nice guys can deliver results. In other words, guys that can be trusted, guys with integrity, guys that play it straight and know how to deal compassionately with other human beings can also deliver fantastic financial results. That's what fired me in that role for the next 3 years that I did it. It's what fired me in my coaching with the various executive leaders I've worked with. And it's certainly what's fired me with this research and most recently writing the book, The Trusted Executive. And I'm convinced, to paraphrase the author Charles Green, I'm convinced that the world is ready for leaders who rely upon the power of trust rather than trust in power. So leaders who rely on the power of trust rather than trusting in power. I think the world is ready for that type of leader, and I'm very keen to encourage anybody who shares that belief to to continue to fight the corner and the cause for that trusted executive.
So let's set up the coming discussion with just some reminders for our viewers or listeners of the cost of trust or lack thereof, the violating of trust. I'm thinking right now about Volkswagen, right? VW. Yeah. And their, the sort of the software that cheats on the emissions testing. I think, from what I'm reading, that is going to cost them tens of billions of dollars and be more expensive than what we had here in the States, this BP Gulf oil spill, right? Just a small violation of trust. But in a world that we're in today, especially the social media world of mouth, it seems like violations of trust are just incredibly damaging to companies.
Yeah, and I think Volkswagen is an interesting case study because maybe 15, 20 years ago, a company of the power and authority of Volkswagen maybe could have got away with it. They could have controlled information sufficiently well to carry on being dishonest and befuddle their stakeholders. And I think the big challenge now, and Volkswagen shows us this, is that you can't get away with it anymore. Eventually, sooner or later, in a world where nothing can be hidden, this information comes into the open and people are exposed. Reputations are exposed, whether that be personal reputations of Martin Winterkorn, the ex-chief exec of Volkswagen, and as you say, the long-term brand destruction and the legal cost, as you say, of the Volkswagen issue, expected to be about $18 billion. I think we can see the cost of a loss of trust and how quickly that can happen to destroy individual and corporate reputations.
Indeed, and there's a couple of Japanese automakers right now that are, going down that same path. Outside the auto industry, what comes to mind in terms of companies that have made major mistakes recently, or organizations? Because you do some sporting work too.
Yeah, if you look at the sporting world, FIFA probably straddles both the business world and the sporting world. And FIFA, currently allegations of $150 million of bribery for the World Cups in Russia and Qatar. So FIFA would be a major headline. We go into the world of politics. Panama Papers recently,
right.
Major issue again of transparency of information. Leaked information exposing practices that, even if they're not illegal, we find that in today's moral climate, the public at large are saying, hang on a minute, we don't think this is right anymore. And the challenge for leaders, whether they be political leaders, sports leaders, business leaders, is to get ahead of the curve with trust. Because leaders anticipate. Managers manage, leaders anticipate. And I'm really hoping that this work will help leaders anticipate that the world around them is moving fast on this topic. And if they don't move equally fast, they might be the next BP, the next FIFA, the next Volkswagen in their particular sector.
So in your research and in your book, you talk about 3 pillars and 9 habits. Let's talk a little bit about that. So tell us about the 3 pillars.
Yeah, so when you look at the academic research that's gone on over the past 30 to 40 years on trust, whilst there is still some disagreement about the definition of trust, there's a very clear agreement about the components of trust. And these 3 pillars of trust, the 3 pillars that inspire trust in others, are ability, integrity, and benevolence. Now, if we take each of those briefly, ability, if I'm a heart surgeon and you have a critical heart condition, you're very interested in my competence to do the job, and you will look firstly to see whether I have the right qualifications to do the job that you're expecting me to do, and then you will say, yes, I trust you in terms of ability. As that relationship develops, integrity becomes part of the formula. So you also want to know that as a heart surgeon, I'm going to give you an honest diagnosis, and that when we have completed that particular operation, that all the aftercare, the billing of that work is all done according to best practice and ethically sound. Now, the last pillar, I think, is the most intriguing for business leaders: benevolence. What does benevolence mean? Benevolence, literally translated, is the 2 Latin words benevolent which literally means wishing well of others. And it's really a pillar that goes beyond the profit motive, beyond the customer service motive. It's really about basic compassionate behavior between two human beings. And that if I am benevolent to you, if I go above and beyond the call of duty, and it's not simply about me saying, hey, this is great customer service. In other words, I expect nothing in return. I'm simply giving something to you. It's a touch of kindness. You are going to much more likely to trust me. I could be very able, very honest, very high integrity. But if I'm cruel or negligent in my relationship with you, then you're still not going to trust me. And I think it's these three together. And the research suggests that it's trust equals ability times integrity times benevolence. So it's not additive. It's not one add the other, add the other. And that means if you're poor at any one of those three,
right, you've got nothing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Zero times anything is zero.
Right.
So this is the powerful piece. But equally, the opportunity of that formula is that if you're good and very good at all three, you're going to be light years ahead of the competition. So this is the opportunity of that formula. There are risks of that formula and opportunities for business leaders in that.
All right, we don't have time for 9 habits today, but give us an example of one.
Well, the habit that I suppose most intrigues me is one under the pillar of integrity. So if we look at those 3 habits under each pillar, but under the pillar of integrity, we have the habit of choosing to be humble. And I think in the traditional model of leadership, we have this image of the very brave, strong, masculine figure riding into battle, crying, "Follow me." And I think this is our traditional stereotype of the very strong, egocentric leader. But as we found in research such as Jim Collins on From Good to Great, his research demonstrates that the real strength, the real sustainability of success from leaders comes from their humility. And that if you can master what he terms level 5 leadership and really move from that level 4 to that level 5, and he uses this phrase about level 5 leaders have this paradoxical combination of intense professional will and extreme personal humility. And I think that step from level 4 to level 5 is the step about choosing to be humble. And if leaders take that step in terms of trustworthiness and integrity, it's a very powerful catalyst for driving trust in their relationships.
Excellent. Now, if, speaking of relationships, let's take this internally. Let's say I'm a CEO or a managing director, and I recognize now, having listened to you, that for whatever reason I have a trust issue in my management team. How would I go about resolving it or starting to rebuild trust? What's your advice there?
I think, like a lot of these challenges, self-awareness is critical. And once a topic is out in the open and is people have permission to discuss it, I think that's a great starting point for moving forward. So in terms of awareness around trust, then what I would recommend is that each of these 9 habits that I've talked about has specific behaviors associated with it. And so there is nothing stopping a CEO from asking for very precise feedback from their management team on their trustworthiness against these 36 behaviors, and equally inviting the whole team to take the same 360 feedback process and then to sit down together and start to talk about that, not as a blame exercise, but as a self-awareness exercise. And if, my experience is that once people have a model, once they're able to talk about that impersonally, then that's the basis for them to move forward and agree action steps. And I think what I hope with the work that I've done is that I've contributed another model. There are many models out there on trust, but having a model, talking about that, using it as the basis to get feedback, I think is a very a good starting point for rebuilding trust or taking trust to the next level.
All right. And so I always like to ask the guest on this podcast series to pose a question to the viewers or listeners, but I understand you have 5 questions, don't you?
Yeah, I have 5 questions related to these 3 pillars and 9 habits, because one of the things I found in my the interviews that I carried out for my research with CEOs on trust is that most CEOs I interviewed instinctively think that keeping promises is 80% of the answer for trust. But actually, when you look at the 9 habits, delivering on what you say you're going to do is one of 9 habits. So as a rough rule of thumb, it's only 11% of the answer. And I think that's a little bit of a shock for a lot of people, that if delivering on my promises is only 11%, then what on earth do I do to get that 11% up, to 90, 80, 90%? And so there's 5 questions that I have, for our listeners, really, to prompt them to think about these other habits. So as well as delivering on your promises, I would ask you, can you help others around you deliver on their promises? Because that is called coaching. And choosing to coach others is one way to unlock trust. I would also ask them, are you honest, open, and humble? We've talked about that word already, and that unlocks that pillar of integrity. Do you make personal sacrifices for the wider good? So this is under the pillar of evangelism. It's about moral bravery. Are you willing to sacrifice your own interests for the wider good of others or for the organization? Do you share the good news of your vision passionately and consistently, come sun or rain? This is a habit I call evangelism. The best and most trusted leaders are often evangelists. They know how to share the good news. And finally, do you go above and beyond the profit motive to deliver random acts of kindness to your stakeholders? That's back to what we said about this power of benevolence, these tiny noticeable things that you can inject into your relationships, which have the ability to make someone's day and really bring that kindness habit into your trust equation.
Fabulous, John. And again, the book is called The Trusted Executive?
Yeah, The Trusted Executive, 9 leadership habits that inspire results, relationships, and reputation.
And I know you're UK based, but I assume we can buy it here in the States on Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon.com. It's available on Amazon.com. So yeah, be delighted if anybody was intrigued to find out more on this topic.
Fabulous. Well, John, it was great catching up with you again. I know we crossed paths actually in the UK last October. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, Dave.
All right, folks, if you're interested in learning more about Vistage, please check out Vistage.com. It's a great way to take your business to the next level. Thanks for listening or watching this episode of the Vistage podcast series. We hope it helps you take your business to the next level.